Okay, and I've divided my talk into several sections, which is talking about successful aging, talking about aging in the present century, and then of course the pandemic and how it has impacted the elderly, and then what we as home economists can do and contribute to. So successful aging, as the picture shows, it's not only good health, it's being happy, it's being actively engaged with life. And it brings me to a prayer which I always put in my presentations. I was really impressed, a Greek prayer which says, "Oh Lord, let me die young, but live as long as possible." And I think that is at the heart of all of us. We don't want to be bedridden, we don't want to be confined to the home, but we want to live long. So we want to be as young as possible till the time we die. And this really captures the essence of how we need to care for the elderly. So when we look at successful aging as defined by WHO, it says it's the modification of behavior to achieve maximal longevity with the highest possible quality of life. So it involves three aspects. It's not only physical health or cognitive health, it's also the low probability of disease and disability and an active engagement with life. So the social and psychological dimension is also very, very important. And when we look at healthy aging, which is a part of the successful aging component, we know that I think all of us study in home economics. One of the basic things is that our health is an interaction of nature and nurture. So genetics and environmental factors both contribute to good health, and nutrition is an important environmental factor. Now, a lot of changes have taken place in society in the last 50 years, making our lifestyles totally different. So the energy expenditure, energy availability, the physical activity, there have been dramatic changes in them, and there's been a reduction in the gross heavy expenditure. So coupled with that, there has been a sharp rise in the prevalence of non-communicable diseases, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and now even cancers. So basically, when we want to live longer and healthier lives, it's not only delaying the process of physiological aging, the organs are degenerating, the functioning is getting affected. That's one aspect, but it's also to prevent or to delay as much as possible the imposition of pathological aging. That means the diseases. So we try to compress the disease probability to the last stages of life, so that if a person does have to suffer from disease, let it be for the minimal time and the rest of the life is healthy. This is a very classic diagram which has been given by Kalache in the 90s, and it still holds good, and it shows a life course approach to aging. When you look at the life course approach to aging, we can't start thinking about old age when we turn 50 or 60. The impact starts right from the beginning. So as you can see here, the red line is the normal curvature or the pattern of functional ability. So early life, there's a tremendous increase in the functional ability. Adulthood, it kind of tapers down slightly. And if the person maintains an ideal lifestyle, I would say, or a healthy lifestyle, the decline would not be too much. But if the person is not maintaining a good lifestyle, there is a very sharp decline, which is the yellow line, in the quality of life. And ultimately in old age, it even goes below the disability threshold. And that is when the senior citizen does need assistance and becomes dependent. So this is something we must avoid as much as we can. When we look at aging, like I said, we have physiological aging and we have pathological aging. And as you can see, physiological aging are the normally expected deterioration or decline in functioning of various organs, various systems in our body. They may occur at different rates in different individuals, but they are part of aging. But the pathological aging is what gets superimposed on it and worsens the situation. So it could be non-communicable diseases like diabetes and all. Also, the fact that most elderly have more than one disease. So if a person has diabetes, they most probably also have hypertension or they have arthritis. And like I said, there's clustering of diseases, there's polypharmacy, there's multiple medications a person has, and the drug nutrient interaction. What is the impact on the body? It all affects the elderly in the aging process. So it's important to take care of our physical health, and it's important to not only try and prevent or manage chronic degenerative diseases, but it's also important to minimize the dependence. And that's why we need to tackle frailty and disability. Now, most people say, oh, as you grow older, you become frail. It's not a natural process. We can prevent or delay frailty. And that's another separate area of science. So I won't go into the details. But frailty is not a normal process of aging, and we must try and delay it as much as possible. And then, of course, we have malnutrition, which most of the nutritionists would be very familiar with, and I won't go into details here about it. And then, of course, today in the pandemic times, we are all very concerned about building up our immunity. And it's not only immunity by taking vitamins and minerals, but it's also having an active lifestyle. It's also prevention of obesity. And then now, as a lot of talk in Asian countries about the use of herbs and spices to build up the immunity. So basically, adopt a promotive, preventive, and therapeutic approach. Again, like I said, it's early. You have to start with the elderly of tomorrow and not target the elderly of today. So you start early and the effects remain for a longer time. When you look at the scope for NCD prevention, again, if you look at right from the beginning, even fetal life, we know that low birth weight babies have a greater chance of developing NCDs later on in life. And therefore, the fetal life becomes very important, whether it's the maternal nutritional status, the socioeconomic position. Infancy is important, adolescence, obesity, lack of physical activity, smoking, all the behavioral risk factors, these all contribute to a much larger risk of NCDs as compared to if these factors are controlled. And therefore, NCD prevention has to start, I would say, even from preconception. And it's not something that we can only talk at the last minute about. So looking at this, the top 10 global causes of death, this is, of course, by region and by the diseases. And if you see here, it's no longer infectious diseases. It's more NCDs, ischemic heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, dementias, diabetes. So the infectious diseases are much lower, diarrheal disease, tuberculosis. The blue bars are the non-communicable diseases, and we can see how they are overtaking the global causes of death from infectious diseases. And therefore, of course, I am not, this diagram doesn't talk of the COVID, but that is a new pandemic that we are facing. The other issue is mental health. The elderly are affected tremendously. Living alone, death of a spouse can lead to depression, loneliness, anxiety attacks, and that is linked to a higher danger of dying, higher danger of dementias, of heart disease. And today we find that COVID anxiety has become a syndrome which is very, very crucial. The elderly are very fearful of the fact that if they get COVID, what is going to happen to them? They're not going to come out of it. And therefore, they need constant counseling, support, family or professional, whatever. They need support. And mental health among the elderly is a very, very important issue. When you look at our changing lifestyles, this is, of course, data from India, but I think most of it would apply to at least the Asian countries. And we find that our lifestyles have contributed to this increasing burden of non-communicable diseases. And as you can see here, the increased risk of NCDs if you look at them, most of them are lifestyle: tobacco, alcohol, physical activity, fruit and vegetable, obesity, the triglycerides, hypertension, short stature. I mean, most of these are lifestyle, and they are modifiable factors. So these are factors that we as home economists can work on with the populations which we are working with. So we need to have successful aging, we need to delay the aging process as much as we can, delay functional decline, delay functional dependence, loss of muscle mass. And how can we do that? There is no specific model, but there are several intervention models which are basically based on diet and exercise. And like I said, management of frailty becomes very important. And then family and social engagement, something which we had overlooked. We had become a community which was kind of self-centered, and there was very little interaction. And we now have come back to realize that this is a very important aspect of our lives for us to maintain our health. So coming to some statistics to show what is the situation of the aged in the 21st century. We know that the number of older persons is going to triple by 2100. And in 2090, we had about 703 million population, which was 9%. And by the 2050, it's going to become 16%. Of course, most of it is in Europe, very few, much lower in Africa, but the burden is going to increase. And what is more worrying is that the people above 80 years of age are going to triple by 2050. So there's going to be an explosion of the oldest old, and that's going to be the new normal in the world. And when we have people, much larger populations with above 80 years old, it's definitely going to put a burden on society, on families, on communities to look after these people. So this is again a diagrammatic representation which shows that we're going to be by 2050 2.1 billion people and 3 billion people above in 2100 all over the world. As you can see here again, we find that presently many of the developing countries are in the green. But by 2050, even they are going to be impacted seriously with aging populations and with increased demands for care and support, which they really can't afford at the time being. These are some population pyramids and of different countries. And I'm giving you an example of Japan. So the conventional inverted pyramid is on the left. The pyramid becomes a column, and then it becomes an inverted pyramid over time. So it basically shows that first you have a lot of younger population, it then kind of equalizes, and after some time the older population is much larger than the younger population. And this is happening in many countries. The Scandinavian countries, Japan, are some countries where this problem is already being faced by the population. And what happens is the dependency increases because the earning population who pay taxes are much lower than the elderly population. So a much lesser number of people are paying tax to look after the social security of a much larger population. And therefore that needs to be, that's going to be an additional burden on society. So this basically shows the same thing, people above 80 years and old. If you look at the bottom bar diagram, you can see the black line is a percentage of people who would need assistance over time. And as you can see that 90% nearly of people, as the age increases, need assistance. So the assistant really starts after 70, and they do need help. And then we have these bar diagrams showing the dependency ratio and how they will change over time. So in a nutshell, I would say the developed world became rich before it became old. And therefore they are able to, they're feeling the burden now, say with COVID, but they were able to look after the elderly. The developing countries are becoming old before they're becoming rich. And that is a very big concern. So what governs this population aging? It's, of course, we all know the conventional factors of fertility, mortality, migration. We know mortality rates are decreasing, the fertility rates are decreasing, and longevity is increasing. But also migration, and migration across countries is really causing a lot of shift in the demographic profiles of countries, because most of the migrants who are migrating are of a younger age group. But these younger age group are ultimately living in that area and growing old there. So this is a diagram which shows how the life expectancy has increased over the years. And if you look at the first figure, the bottom, we have India, which was at about 25, and then it's today about 70, 68, 70. So how all countries have progressed in increasing their life expectancy, and what is the cumulative share of the population of that country. This is again the NCD burden and the decline, the deaths related to the non-communicable diseases. And there is a sharp rise over the years, and as you can see, much higher in the lower income and the lower middle income countries. And that's like another thing which is important. And with the COVID deaths being so many, it is now projected that the average life expectancy of countries will also come down, and maybe by a year also, and these statistics are being worked out. I've already talked about the migration, and you find that migration is mainly of the younger age group, because they are the ones who can go and work at the other place. But then these are the people who go there and grow old and they age there, and the demands on social security increase. The other major issue is feminization of aging, because women tend to outlive men. Now, also what happens in traditional societies, like in parts of Asia and Africa, the women were dependent on the men. They were not working. And therefore, when the spouse dies, the woman becomes totally dependent for her needs on other members of the family or on the government. And therefore, older women are more likely to live alone, to live in poverty, independency, and long-term care. And their health, because of gender-based discrimination, because of cultural and social biases, the patriarchal system of the family, they are already on a poor wicket. So they really need extra care. And financial security for the elderly is very, very important. Many countries, including India, does not have a system of social security, and therefore the elderly have to fend for themselves. And that is a very frightening prospect, especially with the escalating healthcare costs. And in countries like India, the elderly do not even have a health insurance. So if they fall sick, what do they do? And that's why this is a tremendous mental burden on these elderly people. With also inflation and with also decreasing returns on investment, the savings or the pensions that these elderly have are not able to meet their costs of daily living. And that's another constraint that they have. So besides that, of course, there is financial abuse in the family. There may be frauds. There may be, after the death of the spouse, this person is totally dependent on other people and may be taken for a ride. So all these issues are a big strain on the elderly person. And then, of course, we come to ageism. And ageism exists in all cultures. And of course, in some cultures, the reverence for the elderly is there, but that's also gradually changing. And today, it's not wisdom which the elderly have, but it's wealth, power, status, prestige, which becomes important for the younger people to look up to people. What is also happening is with the pandemic, there has been in countries where there was a there was a restraint or a deficiency of healthcare facilities, there was a lot of resentment that why are elderly people being cared for in hospitals. And also there was a strategy that people who were past 80 or whatever were not given enough care, and that bed or the hospital bed was kind of given to a younger person. And therefore, this has also increased um, that bifurcation of the elderly and the young. And the elderly people feel that the young people are flouting norms, they're going to pubs, there's no social distancing, and they are putting them at a disadvantage. And therefore, this intergenerational gap is further widening, and ageism is becoming more predominant. When you look at family structures, of course, we've always been talking about breaking up the joint family system. But now with the COVID pandemic, aging in place is coming back. The elderly do not want to go to old age homes. The major number of deaths have occurred in old age homes or in care facilities. They want to live at home, but they don't want to live with children. So they have to be alternate models, maybe living next to each other, maybe living on different floors. And the elderly also want to contribute to society. You know, that successful aging, they should not be felt that they are a waste. They are past their prime and they cannot contribute to society. And therefore, it's very important that they are involved. Now, with aging in place happening, the government will not be able to support them. The families will have to look after them at home. But yes, the government can support the family to look after the elderly. I'll be talking about it when we talk about the challenges for home economics. So there will be need for professional caregivers, trained caregivers. There'll be need for even family members being trained how to look after elderly people. Another important issue with elderly is abuse. And as you can see in this diagram, the pie diagram, which is a worldwide diagram, it shows 58.5% people do have abuse. Of course, there are different types of abuse, but this is just the verbal abuse. And this sometimes just goes overlooked. And we know that the abuse may be of different types. It could be financial, it could be not giving food, etc., etc. But this is, it very much is there. Okay, then we have climate change, increasing disasters. Look at the Californian wildfires, look at the floods, the typhoons, which are coming every day. And we know that the emergencies are not catered to the elderly. And we found that in the Japanese tsunami of 2011, 56% of those who died were above 60 years of age. And they are not ready to cope up with the stress, you know. So there is, because there's physical decline, the emergency services are not tailored for elderly. And another thing would be age discrimination. So it's, when it comes to a matter of saving people, it would be maybe the children and the women who are saved first, then the elderly. So there is, the elderly are not, kind of prioritized in any disaster management or climate change efforts. But we must remember that in an agrarian society, it's the elderly who are living in that village who would be able to guide you as to how the traditional agri systems were able to tackle these kind of emergencies. Like if there was a flood, this is what they would do. If there was a pest coming into their fields and destroying their entire fields, this is how they combated with it. So we need to learn from the elderly also. And then, of course, we have the technology explosion. It's become the way of sharing knowledge. And there are no boundaries. Today, I'm talking to many people, like we said, from different parts of the world. And similarly, it's whether it's telemedicine, it's health, it's social, you can be on technology and gain any benefit. But the elderly are not familiar or comfortable with these rapidly changing technologies. I'm sure many of us middle-aged people are also not familiar with them and how we can integrate them into our daily life. And this is a challenge again, which we as home economists can address. We can train them, we can guide them, we can support them to cope up with technology. Okay, how will COVID affect? This was something which has come in, and some of the changes are going to be disturbing, some will be welcome. Like I said, some people, COVID is focusing attention on isolation of older persons, which has long been a problem. So social isolation is going to affect them. Second thing, like I told you, is rising government expenditure, deficits, falling investment is making people decide not to retire because they need the income. So they will continue to work as much as they can. And some of the changes, of course, would be welcome, because most people would like to remain at home. Maybe they were earlier traveling to meet their children, grandchildren. They will miss that, but they'll happy to be at home. But there will be a boom in innovations on improving the quality of life of the elderly, which I think is a very, very positive sign. And we are going to have to plan for dying. We need to, to plan for how we need to stay, how we are going to die. All these issues will be really upfront, and we need to really think about them and do something about them. So when people are staying at home, what would they need? They would need neighborhood-based packages. Maybe that community feeling or knowing your neighbors comes in. There could be home care facilities. We have a lot of companies coming into home care of elderly after the COVID epidemic. So they are dealing with looking after the elderly in different places. There could be, like I said, models where a youngster in the colony is being paid to look after the elderly in the colonies, home-like cooperative housing. There could be also, senior living, which is segregated living, but that would not be such a good choice, because it's important to also consider the aged as a source of wisdom, as a repository of knowledge, wisdom, and so at the end of this section, I would just like to say that we would have tremendous implications on social and mental health, environment, education, demands for goods and services, and the family structures and the socio-cultural and intergenerational issues.